summed up in those images from Victorian literature and reinforced by 20th century popular culture, which have such a powerful hold over our imagination. So we think of the perfect family feast. We think of the perfectly decorated tree, chestnuts roasting over an open fire, mistletoe and wine, and so on. And I think it's still these, perhaps with a slightly quirky twist, that are restated in contemporary Christmas advertisements, designed to be heartwarming and appealing and to get us to shop at certain stores. The perfect Christmas dinner, the perfect present, the perfect family. That's one face of our human experience of Christmas, often as expectation, then as pressure, and finally as stress, sometimes quite intolerable stress upon us. If we can't reproduce the perfect Christmas, then somehow we must be failures. And it doesn't need someone else to say this to us, because we've been so conditioned that we say it to ourselves. It was summed up in an encounter that Barbara observed one Christmas Eve many years ago, when in one of the supermarkets, this was back in Newport, she noticed in the vegetable aisle a customer was in tears and berating a poor shop assistant because there were no more Brussels sprouts left. And we thought, what sort of a Christmas is it that can be ruined by the absence of a particular vegetable? But perhaps the shopper's tears are windows onto another face of Christmas. For behind the smiles and the superficial glosses, Christmas can be a very hard time for many people. The pressure of expectations is immense. We load that pressure onto other people and onto ourselves. No wonder that family get-togethers can become a bit tense. No wonder relationships become strained. Whatever inadequacies we manage to cope with through the year can be magnified uncontrollably at Christmas time. Under such pressure, most people are liable to explode. Because at Christmas we are very vulnerable. The lonely feel more isolated, the troubled more distressed, the poor more deprived, the sad more inconsolable. For some people who manage to cope throughout the year, Christmas Day is the worst of times because they feel they fall so far short of what the world expects, so far short of that perfect Christmas to which we are expected to aspire. We, our culture that is to say, have made what should be a season of life and light for all into a dark and a difficult time for many. That's the darker side of Christmas. And it really is just the consequence, the flip side of the perfect Christmas that we have been sold. And so it is a joy that in the Christian community, and especially in our times of worship, we can sit very lightly to all the pressures of commercialism, all the prejudices and perfections of that our culture would impose upon us. And we can do this because we know something that the world around us does not know. We know that the heart of Christmas is not to be found in the latest celebrity chef recipes, and it's not to be found in the social glamour of colour supplements, but somewhere very, very different. And if we want to see what Christmas is really about, we don't turn to the slick ads and the style gurus, we turn to the pages of the Gospels, and we see the heart of the festival in the events that gave it birth. And when we look to the Gospels, we see the truly perfect Christmas. And what is so liberating is that that first Christmas was not only so completely unlike our image of the perfect Christmas, it actually subverts it, turns it upside down. Let me demonstrate. Let's do a little thought experiment for a moment. If we had been in charge of making arrangements for the birth of the Messiah, how would we have planned it? How would we have carried out that first Christmas? Here's a suggestion. First of all, we would have had that Messiah King born in the capital, born in the holy city. No cryptic words from ancient scrolls would have stopped us from making preparations there in Jerusalem. The birth of, in an insignificant town like Bethlehem, a A childhood spent in Galilee? No way. Jerusalem is the city of palaces, the city of the temple, the city of kings. Where else can the Messiah be born? And where else could possibly be worthy of his glory? And where would he have been born in that city? Well, where else can a king be born but in a palace? So no prophecies of donkeys and oxen knowing their master's crib would have made any difference to us. No, we would have had Jesus born in a palace there in Jerusalem, preferably a palace to rival the glories of Rome, where that pagan son of the gods, Augustus Caesar, reigned supreme. So we would have been busy preparing the perfect palace with marble floors and gold leaf and a crib crafted of ivory. And in our Christmas story, Joseph would be a prince and Mary a princess. She would give birth surrounded by aristocratic women. There would be nobles and courtiers in attendance in the outer room, and the birth would have been heralded by choirs of singers proclaiming to the city that God's special king had arrived. And the child would be given every luxury money could buy to ensure that he grew up in the circumstances his status required. And let's think a bit further on. As an adult, such a king would certainly be skilled in military tactics, in combat, so he could lead his army into victory over the pagan forces of the world, and he could impose by force his kingdom over the whole earth. Wouldn't that be the sort of story that we would tell if it was left to us? In such a story, the perfect king would, of course, require people to play their part perfectly, and those who did not live up to expectations would probably end up in the dungeons or worse. That, or something like it, would have been our perfect Christmas nativity story. It would be a tale of earthly power, of wealth and status, all that the world uses to express value, even as it warmed our hearts with tales of great victories. It would confirm our prejudices and establish all those values of the world. Isn't it wonderful that God's story is so different as to be almost unrecognizable? So let's review the way that God chose for the birth of the Messiah. Let's review that truly perfect first Christmas. Think first of the parents. I know by his lineage, Joseph is in fact a descendant of King David, but that's about all he has in common with our version of the story, because whatever his ancestors, Joseph is just an ordinary carpenter. In fact, he's so poor and marginal that at some point he's had to move from Bethlehem to distant Nazareth in Galilee. Nazareth in Galilee, the butt of Judean prejudices. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? You can read that in John chapter 1. And Mary is just an ordinary young woman. So ordinary, we don't even know who her parents were. Mary and Joseph are just an ordinary young couple. They're hoping to carve out a simple existence for themselves in a dark and a cruel world, where immoral and brutal emperors and kings and governors sweep into power and seem to be in complete control. To the eyes of the world, Mary and Joseph are nothings and nobodies. They're mere pawns in the world's ruthless game of chess. Think about the circumstances. We've spoken of the poverty into which Jesus was born. It's the sort of poverty that today we see in developing countries, in those countries where there are a few people who are mega rich and most of the population is on the brink of destitution. Countries where a handful of people own more than all the rest of the population put together. But actually, that's pretty much the situation globally in our world today, where the world's richest 26 people, yes, 26 people, richest people in the world, own as much as the poorest 50%. That's about 3.5 billion people. Think about that. Once Joseph has been reassured by the angel that he and Mary could continue then to hope and plan for their family life together as best as they could in all the uncertainties of first century Palestine. But then it only takes one word from the emperor in Rome via the local governor Quirinius to upset all their plans. Joseph must return to Bethlehem for the census, and Mary, so close to giving birth, will go with him. And so Joseph and Mary, 9 months pregnant, are removed from their home and forced to journey those 70 or more miles. It's a week's journey probably, and walking all the way, unless Mary can hitch a ride on a cart going in their direction, or maybe on a donkey. And they don't have the money to pay to sleep in hostels, so they have to sleep in the open air and maybe buy a little bit of bread to keep themselves going, and wonder where they will stay when they arrive, and when the baby, God's special child, will be born. And of course, what we're talking about is the hardship that so many refugees face today. Think of those fleeing conflicts around the world. In the Lake Chad region of Africa, those fleeing war in Syria and Afghanistan, fleeing Eritrea, fleeing economic collapse in Venezuela. There are still people, many people, in that sort of situation. So where will the baby be born, to come back to our story? If Joseph has relatives still in Bethlehem, they are not wealthy enough to provide suitable accommodation. No room in the inn may well be better translated as no space in the guest room. But either way, the result is the same. Mary's birth plan has gone out of the window, as it were, and she and Joseph must make the best of things that they can. What a disaster it may look like. But of course it's not a disaster at all, because God is at work. And when the baby is born alive and healthy, and the mother well, and the family united in love, then however different it may be from our plans, in fact everything has turned out well. And the purpose, think about it, just thinking on to the life of Jesus. In our retelling of the story, the baby would have grown up to become a fearless warrior, imposing righteousness with the sword, establishing a universal kingdom of peace by bloodshed. But God tells such a different story. The baby is born to poor parents, homeless, soon to be a refugee, son of a family always on the verge of economic ruin, and nobody in the world where power lies with the Caesars and the Herods. And he grows up not to shake off the shackles of a foreign empire. He grows up to give his life as the atoning sacrifice for the sin of the world. And you know, violent revolutionaries, even successful ones, are 2 a penny in the course of history, and they're soon forgotten. But only one man has ever shed his innocent blood so that the sins of the world might be forgiven and evil might be conquered. His name alone lives on when the petty tyrants are long forgotten or remembered only as accessories to his story. So this is God's story, and it is, as all God's work, a perfect story. In that story, he gives the perfect Christmas in the actual events of the birth of Jesus. How strange it seems to us, how hard to understand that this was the perfect Christmas, because it's the Christmas of the refugee, the Christmas of the homeless, the Christmas of the dispossessed and poor, of a family on the margins of society. How can this be the perfect Christmas? Yes, but how can our so-called perfect Christmases be so empty? How can our perfect Christmases be such failures year after year when we take down all those expensive decorations and we ask ourselves, what, if anything, has changed? Well, the difference between the two is one thing and one thing only. In our supposedly perfect Christmases, God is absent, or is only perhaps there on the margins. But in God's truly perfect Christmas, God is everywhere present. From the moment the angel appears to Mary, it's obvious not only that God is in control of the events, but he is there in the events as they happen. He is there through the angel that appears to Mary and through the angels that sing to the shepherds. He is there in the faith response of Mary. May it be to me according to your word. He is there in the joy of Elizabeth and the child she's carrying. The baby leapt for joy in her womb, and Elizabeth, filled with the Spirit, exclaimed, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear." God is there with the the young couple as they make their slow way to Bethlehem. He is there in the happiness of that safe birth, even in a stable. And he is there in the excitement of the shepherds and the testimony of the Magi. And God is certainly present in the words that Mary sings. My soul magnifies the Lord, my spirit rejoices in God my Saviour. And in the words of that song, God is present in that description of a world that is turned upside down as his perfect Christmas subverts all our little dreams and plans. What does Mary say? She says, he has scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He has brought down the mighty from their seats and exalted the humble and meek. He has filled the hungry with good things, but the rich he has sent empty away. This is God's perfect Christmas story. In doing things differently, he exposes the emptiness and the evil of our world that fawns over earthly power, that flatters status and bows down before wealth. No wonder he is not to be found in the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we enact in our lives. While we are constructing our worldly perfections, he is already telling, enacting his Christmas story through the poor, the refugee, the outcast, and the nobody. God's Christmas story then subverts all our priorities, turns upside down all our values, and that's exactly what Mary is singing about in the Magnificat. And why? Because God shows us a different and a better way of living, his perfect story. And he shows us how we should live his way, not the way of the world. So the world values pride, but we are to value humility. The world values force, but we are to value gentleness. The world values gold and silver, but we're to value treasures of love and joy and peace. The world values outward show, but we are to value pure hearts. The world values the winner takes all, but we are to value the peacemaker and the one who brings reconciliation. The world values greed, we are to value generosity. If we want to find God in Christmas, we have to make sure that we're in the right story. And here's a matter we can do something about. We can seek out, not shy away from the needy this Christmas. We can give generously to those who will never repay us. We can give, not take. We can share and not hoard. We can seek genuinely and sacrificially the good of others who are in need. To give and not to count the cost. To care about the refugees seeking asylum. To care about the homeless seeking refuge. They are close to God's heart, and they should be close to our hearts also. To find the perfection of Christmas, not in all those material things that we grab to ourselves, but in the love, joy, and peace, regardless of circumstances. In such ways, we can enter into God's perfect Christmas story. And then we'll avoid equally those two faces of our human Christmases, the oppressive perfections of the world and the disillusion and disappointment of their failure. Because in the end, one thing alone matters, that we find Jesus, that we know him to be Emmanuel, God with us, that we know that in him all our longings and hopes find their fulfillment. Know that in him, through his life, his death and resurrection, in Christ Jesus, we are part of God's perfect story, whatever our circumstances, whatever we may be going through, whatever may happen to us. And if we are part of his story, then yes, we are part of the real perfect Christmas, whatever these coming weeks may bring to us. Let's reflect on that. We're going to